As we enter the final turn of this presidential election cycle, it is important to fact check what one candidate is saying about the other in terms of their policy position. Now, while Donald Trump has been fact checked and debunked several times, can we say the same of Kamala Harris? Is what she's saying regarding Donald Trump actually true, particularly when statements like this are stated on the trail?
Donald Trump intends to take America backward to the failed policies of the past. He has no intention to grow our middle class. He's only interested in making life better for himself and people like himself, the wealthiest of Americans. You can see it spelled out in his economic agenda. An agenda that gives trillions of dollars in tax cuts to billionaires and the biggest corporations, while raising taxes on the middle class by almost $4,000 a year, slashing overtime pay, throwing tens of millions of Americans off of health care, and cutting Social Security and Medicare. In sum, his agenda would weaken the economy and hurt working people and the middle class.
Let's look into it, and let's begin with tax cuts for corporations. Currently, the tax rate for corporations is at 21%. And Donald Trump has, in fact, announced that he is floating the idea of lowering that tax rate down to 15%, giving corporations a savings of 6%. You will recall earlier that he was throwing the number out there of 20%. Well, it has now went from a 1% savings to a 6% savings. So this actually maps out. Now, what this would continue is the nearly $233 billion that corporations saved during Donald Trump's first term. So Kamala Harris's claim here actually checks out. But what about raising taxes on the middle class as well as eliminating the Affordable Care Act or significantly impairing it? Well, according to the Center for American Progress, Trump plans on extending his 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. What this means is that those in the top 0.1% income tax bracket would save about $175,000 in taxes each year. Now, important to J.D. Vance and Donald Trump is that they reform the Affordable Care Act. They've stated this on the campaign trail several times. Now, if they continue in the trajectory that Trump was on during his first term, this would mean that those in that top 0.1%, any taxes that they pay that is affiliated or connected to the Affordable Care Act would be eliminated. This would mean an additional $225,000 in savings for those families, bringing it to approximately $400,000. Now, as those families save those $400,000, the tax burden increases on the middle class as well as the working class. Now, leaning further into this, where does this $4,000 figure come from that Kamala Harris is always speaking about? And how might this relate to the middle class? Well, you will recall that in 2018, Donald Trump signed the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. This moved the United States to that new trade agreement from the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. Under NAFTA, the tariff rate was at 7%. Under USMCA, it moved from 7% to 10%. And that is the percentage that we are under now. So in addition to inflation and what's going on in the economy, you have an increase in 3% on tariffs on various goods that are being passed down to consumers. Well, the thing about the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement is that within its policy, it has to be revisited every 6 years. And what Trump has stated is that he will move that tariff from 10% to 20%, doubling it. And according to the Center for American Progress, that will cost everyday American families about $4,000 in these various categories. So, Kamala Harris's claim here does in fact check out. Trump's policies will cost American families more. Now, what about slashing overtime pay? Because what Kamala Harris is saying versus what Trump is saying on the campaign trail seem to be at odds with one another.
I'm also announcing that as part of our additional tax cuts, we will end all taxes on overtime. You know what that means? Think of that.
Who is telling the truth here, and where exactly does this claim come from? Well, this claim comes from page 592 of the Mandate for Leadership, or as it's more popularly known, Project 2025, specifically under the section that says overtime pay threshold. And it reads, overtime pay is one of the most challenging aspects of the Fair Labor Standards Act rules. It then goes on to say that Congress should provide flexibility to employers and employees to calculate the overtime period over a longer number of weeks. Specifically, employers and employees should be able to set a 2 or 4 week period over which to calculate overtime. This would give workers greater flexibility to work more hours in 1 week and fewer hours in the next, and would not require the employer to pay them more for the same total number of hours of work during the period. What this effectively means is that your employer could require that you work 60, 70, maybe 80 hours in a week, and then adjust your hours toward the end of a month so that way they don't have to pay you overtime. So Trump's claim here that he's eliminating taxes on overtime is because of the fact that he is adjusting the structural constraints such that employers can place labor where it is needed and maximize that labor and then reduce it in other areas, thus avoiding overtime. In this particular instance, the devil is in the details, and probably makes sense why Trump said this.
I know a lot about overtime. I'd hated to give overtime. I hated it. I'd get other people, I shouldn't say this, but I'd get other people in, I wouldn't pay. I hated.
What about Kamala Harris's claim that Donald Trump wants to cut Social Security as well as Medicare? Is there any truth to this? On the campaign trail, as well as on social media, more specifically the site that he owns, Donald Trump has stated that senior citizens should not pay taxes on Social Security. Seemingly a good thing, right? Well, here's the thing. That is already enacted policy that is taking place. The policy is clear that senior citizens who earn less than $25,000 in combined income, $32,000 if they are married, do not pay taxes on Social Security. That is already on the books. What the policy does state is that senior citizens who have a combined income of $25,000 or more do pay taxes on that amount, because that amount is then circulated back into the fund. Because to cut those taxes would be to cause the sunset date of the program to rapidly speed up. There is a decision to be made in this election. And as the days wind up, it is important that we look into the policies more closely to understand what their implications are and what it may mean for you as an individual. As you go into the voting booth, make sure you are choosing wisely and that you are researching policies, that we are not caught up in the identity of the candidate or the energy of the moment, but that we go into the booth clear about policies and the implications of those policies so that we all make an informed decision. I'll see you next time. Peace.